Welcome to the Founders, Funders, and Friends podcast, where we interview entrepreneurs, investors, and the innovators building the future. Each interview features a special guest in conversation with Studio Management founder and managing partner Alap Shah, recorded in front of a live audience in New York City. Founders, Funders, and Friends is presented by Studio Management, a data-driven asset management firm investing across public equities and venture capital. Tobias Rose-Stockwell. On this episode, we are excited to welcome Tobias Rose-Stockwell, a writer, designer, and technologist whose work has made significant impacts across various fields. Tobias's research has been featured in The Atlantic, Wired, NPR, the BBC, CNN, and many others, and has influenced key interventions aimed at reducing toxicity and polarization within leading tech platforms. In addition to his work in technology, Tobias has led humanitarian projects in Southeast Asia, focused on Civil War reconstruction efforts, earning an award from the 14th Dalai Lama for his contributions. Based in New York City, Tobias continues to push the boundaries of design and technology to create positive change. On this episode, we discuss his latest book, The Outrage Machine, a culmination of his life's work at the intersection of technology and its effects on society at large. Please join us in welcoming Tobias Rose-Stockwell.
Thanks, Johnny. Let's jump into it. So your initial sort of founding story at the beginning of the book is a really beautiful and powerful experience around much louder.
There he is.
That really sets the stage for what I would think about as early Web 2, early kind of social media, and the promise that it potentially had before things maybe went a little bit south. So rather than me kind of butchering it, would love to just have you tell the audience that's a great place to kind of start the conversation.
Sure. So this book actually began, its inception point happened when I was 23 years old. I was a backpacker traveling around Southeast Asia. I had very little money, but I was really interested in kind of steeping myself in different cultures and doing volunteer work, as one does. And I met a monk while I was traveling through Cambodia, and this monk invited me out to his village in the middle of nowhere. And so I said, sure, why not? This is great. I love, integrating with different cultural experiences, having this great, rich experience with different cultures. I went out into the countryside with this monk for this community visit, and when I got there, he brought me this little pagoda on this little dusty patch and sat me down on a bamboo mat. And instead of meeting his family and having a nice community visit, I met hundreds of villagers, common council and village elders who were all there. And they got up one by one and said, thank you for coming. We've been waiting for you. We have this project. Thank you for agreeing to help us rebuild this reservoir. I'm like, excuse me, what? Basically, this monk had kind of, I want to say conned me, but he had basically jumped me with this project by bringing me out to this little spot in the middle of nowhere. And when I got there, I was like, no, I think you have the wrong person. I'm sorry. This is not me. Sorry. But tell me more. I'm at least curious. And basically this monk ran a local NGO that was looking for $15,000 to rebuild this large-scale irrigation system that had been destroyed during the Civil War in Cambodia. It provided about 5,000 people with a second crop of rice, which was a lot of money for me, but also a lot of rice for them. And they thought somehow I could do it. I wasn't a trust fund kid. I didn't have a degree in hydrology or engineering, but I did have the internet. And so I said, look, I'm not your guy, but I'll at least be an advocate on your behalf. And I wrote an email to friends and family back home. This email went and landed in a feed on a site that some friends had designed. This was 2003. To date myself, but pre-social media. But it landed in this specific type of platform that a couple of friends had built back home, a forum platform with profile pictures, with connections to friends. It was a social media platform before we had a name for that thing. And this email went viral, massively viral. Suddenly I had strangers reaching out from anywhere, asking if they could help rebuild this irrigation system in Cambodia. And this was this sudden kind of cascade of interest and support in solving this problem for these people, which was amazing. It was incredible. So all of a sudden I was like, oh, wow, maybe I can actually help these monks. $15,000, that's like the price of a cheap car. Maybe I can do that. And so I was like, okay, maybe I can spend 2 months on this project. There's not much going on. I'm a 23-year-old backpacker. I can spend 2 months on this project. I'll try to go back home, try to raise his capital, and I'll come back and I'll just knock it out. I'll just knock it out fast. I ended up living in Cambodia for almost 7 years. $15,000 turned into $250,000. We found landmines. We had to demine this entire area. It was just a deeply difficult project, but one that was enabled by this amazing connective power of social media, the earliest social media. So this book was really, in the early days, me reckoning. I thought about this as like, this is an empathy machine. This is a tool, like social media is a tool to help you connect to people and help you connect to the unseen, helping you find these hidden causes that otherwise would be ignored. And so I was quite optimistic. I was so deeply optimistic about these tools early on. I moved back to Silicon Valley. I started working on a couple different companies, a couple different projects that were trying to use these early tools, early Facebook, early Twitter, to connect people to social causes. And you might remember what it felt like back in that day. People would say Facebook is just so good at connecting people. Social media is great for democracy. Look at the Arab Spring. It was amazing. This amazing thing that that we've created that is now toppling dictators in the Middle East. Like Mark Zuckerberg created this thing to get girls, and it just deposed a dictator, right? Incredible. So, of course, it turns out that any cause, any kind of unseen, hidden cause, can now find an audience online. It doesn't matter, however, if that cause is a bunch of worthy monks in the middle of Cambodia or a right-wing Nazi conspiracy, right? This is the same dynamic that we were just beginning to unpack. So that's the beginning and the genesis of this book, and I started in this kind of realization that social media is not just an empathy machine. Of course, we know that now, but it's actually a much deeper tool, a tool that helps amplify any emotion, any negatively valenced emotion, primarily, that is related to activating us around feelings of empathy and feelings of outrage, which are not different emotions. Not so different emotions, yeah, I might say.
Makes sense. So would love to understand from your viewpoint how we went from that early hope to where we are today. Clearly there's some very important waypoints and some decisions that were made, I would argue, I think most of us would argue, very intentionally for profit, for engagement, that went from this shining hill to where we are today.
Right. Yeah, so you guys probably remember this. Again, early euphoria, social media, everyone loved it. There was 3 features that were launched between the years of 2009 and 2012. All 3 were launched with very good intentions. They were launched quietly. They were updated without our knowledge. But these 3 specific features fundamentally shifted the type of content that we see online. You might remember, if you were on these tools around 2012, how they just suddenly got much more sticky. You're like, oh, I'm on my phone more than I expected. I'm here. I'm in this virtual space more than I thought. That it felt like kind of like the feed had jumped out and attached itself to your face in this strange way, and you're like, oh, weird. I kept finding myself putting it down and picking it up and putting it down. But that transition happened very, very subtly in 3 feature sets. The first is the creation of social metrics. So that is the like button. We all like the like button, right? And the creator of the like button, Justin Rosenstein, he when he was working on this, he felt like this was a great tool for increasing better signal for developers, so you know what you're actually liking on the content, right? And for increasing the path of positivity, so actually giving people more ways to express positivity online. He wanted to make it the positivity, the path of least resistance, is what he said. But it turns out when you have visible likes and metrics attached to a post, it does something very strange to our brains. When we post something, we may or may not get a response from our audience, right? We might get 2 likes, we might get 10 likes, we might get 200 likes, right? There's this phenomenon called intermittent variable rewards, which was discovered by B.F. Skinner, a psychologist, back in the 1930s. He built these boxes that he would put pigeons into, and pigeons would press a lever when a light flashed and get a food pellet. And they found that if there was consistency, if they pressed the lever and got a food pellet every time, the pigeons would get sated and get bored and stop doing it. But if there was randomness involved, then it kind of hacked the pigeon's brain, and they went crazy, and they would just keep pressing it and trying to figure out the pattern of what was happening with the food pellet, figuring out why it's coming out, right? And it turns out this is applicable to mammals, very applicable to humans. And you can hack people's brains with what is colloquially called a Skinner box. You see them in video games, and one particular industry that has capitalized on this incredibly well is the industry of gambling. You would notice a slot machine is a thing you press. You do one thing, you press a button, and you get rewards or you don't. And that makes us go a little bit crazy. So social metrics, one, it's put us all into this constant process of performance and engagement, trying to get the payout of the likes from the machine. Number two, the algorithmic feed, how we rank order content. It makes a lot of sense to build an algorithmic feed. We have so much information we're generating on a regular basis. We don't want to open our phones and miss the important updates from our friends. It makes absolute sense why we would put that in to rank order content. But as soon as that happened, a certain type of content tended to stick to the top of our feeds. If I'm angry about something, if you're angry about something, if Eli is angry at something, and he posts something online that gets a lot of engagement, right? Other people that are talking about it, like Eli says something incendiary, which he always does. He never does, for what it's worth. And someone else disagrees with him. A basic engagement algorithm is going to say that's important. That's what you should. That's a meaningful social interaction. You should look at this. So when you open your phones, that's at the top of your feed, and that causes us as individuals to lean in more to the conflicts that generate engagement, right? So social metrics, algorithmic feed, and the third one is the one-click share. It is the way that it's so easy now. It's a single button, you click share, and it goes out your entire network. Whatever it is, doesn't matter what the content is. Single button, everyone gets what you are thinking, right? So these three features together basically made emotionally arresting and negatively valence content, which is saying bad content, I would say, colloquial bad content. It made it incredibly viral suddenly, right? In a way that I think was very subtle for us all, right? We didn't see it happen, but it has fundamentally shifted the type of discourse we have as a society, right? Because we're now pushing our perceptions largely through these tools, largely through social media. And it's shifted the entire landscape of our conversations towards a level of outrage that I think is really problematic.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to think back on the early Facebook, for those of us who are on it, where it was a lot of work to share. And as we've made those barriers lower and lower and lower, and you might think about something like Snapchat, where it's even easier than that, right? It just becomes more and more powerful and more and more ubiquitous.
Right. Yeah. The way I think about it, it's and this is how I opened the book, but basically, if you thought about a blast of gamma radiation blanketing the planet and suddenly giving us all a mutant ability, that ability is basically telepathy now, right? And that's the ability to go viral, right? We all have this magical new capacity. If we say the right thing in the right way, we can inform everyone on Earth about it. It just turns out that the right thing is often the wrong thing also, right? So we all have these new superpowers right now, and like any good superhero movie, we're blowing up institutions and buildings in the process of trying to figure out how to use it.
Yeah, for those of you who haven't read the book, I definitely recommend it. One of the funnest parts is how Tobias does a great job of taking what we have all taken for granted, going back to before we had them, and then essentially creating thought experiments of, hey, this is what happened. So I think the first one you used was everyone has invisibility, and then soon thereafter everyone has telepathy. And it's a really interesting thought experiment way to think about what's happening to us, because it's hard to look at it until afterwards. So I love to think about things in an evolutionary biology context. And if you think about the way that humans evolved, it was through natural selection over many, many generations. Obviously, none of the time scales that we're experiencing ourselves, we would be able to experience something like evolution, but the baton has been passed since then to two kind of very different things. One is this idea of memes and the way culture transmits memes and culture evolves, and sets of humans together evolve. And the second would be technology is the thing that lets us do more and essentially kind of do things with nature and all the sort of elements that we're given. And both those things, the way I look at it, have been evolving separately for a long time. And for whatever reason, social media is this perfect union of both the evolution of memes and the evolution of technology in kind of this single technology and platform. And so I guess if you look at it that way, it's not that surprising to think about how quickly it's completely turned our world upside down. So curious, based on your research and kind of in the book, how you think about that transition of memes and how that's affecting kind of the world today.
Yeah, totally. Does anyone know what a meme is? Yeah, a couple people. Okay, cool. We all know what memes are, right? Memes are funny pictures of cats and Kermit the Frog like sipping on something with like text put over it. That tends to be very funny and interesting, right? It tends to be stuff that is like it's like telling a bigger story to it. It's like a very simple piece, but it has this subtext that like pulls you in. And you're like, aha, yes. Well said, a meme. So memes are not just like internet lore. They're not just like, it's not just an internet word. It comes from this biologist named Richard Dawkins in a book, a very famous book called The Selfish Gene, which you've probably heard of at some point in time. And he had this very kind of unique way of thinking about genes in our body, like the genes that run our genetic code, that run our phenotypical and biological behavior. He was like, okay, cool. A gene is just a unit of information, right? You can look at a strand of DNA and you can pull out the genes that are in there, and you can read it and you can see what it does, and you can actually kind of extrapolate out a whole bunch of human behavior. But the gene itself just wants to reproduce, right? It's the desire that we have for sexual reproduction, to find a mate, to reproduce. Every animal has it. Every plant has. Every living creature has it because it's a gene. The gene wants to reproduce. He also thought that, well, what's so special about genetic information? It could just be normal information too. It could be just like any information that wants to reproduce. So he called these things, instead of genes, he called them memes. He said, well, memes operate the exact same way as genes. If you can hum a catchy tune, right? And commercials are great at this, like the cereal commercials back in the day when we were kids, they sing a song and someone would hum it nearby and you'd be like, oh, it's in my brain, I can't get rid of it. That is the same thing as a meme, as a gene, but as a meme, transmitting into your brain and just looking for a host, right? So if you look at it like a meme, like this little thing that just wants to reproduce, it's a kind of a creepy way of thinking about information online. It's a little bit meta. But you can see how certain types of information online will propagate, will explode like a population of bacteria, right, across our collective brains, if they have a tool to connect to us, right? And so, like you're saying, we are socially obsessed creatures. Social media is obsessive on its own. It makes sense that this would also become a place where memes, where these little chunks of information would look to propagate around. And it turns out outrage is a great way to propagate information, right? So if you actually want to build like a selective system, if you want to breed memes to spread rapidly, social media is a great way of doing that. And outrage is a fantastic way of spreading information across the whole of our species. So
it's also an interesting kind of contrast where Dawkins really speaks to, the way that before I read The Selfish Gene, the idea was we as an individual seek to reproduce. But the way our genes are actually set up is it's not us as an individual at all. It's gene by gene. Each gene wants to reproduce. And if it's a gene that is negative to the next generation in the species, the gene doesn't care. The gene just wants to reproduce at that sort of unit layer.
Right.
And memes are exactly the same way.
Yeah.
And it's almost like you've given it a chamber to reproduce as fast as possible and mutate as fast as possible.
Right. So the idea of going viral, like a virus is actually just a chunk of genetic code. Viruses aren't technically really alive. They're just a chunk of genetic code that propagates because it can, reproduces because it can. Memes are the same way. The idea of going viral comes from this idea of memes propagating across our brains and our society.
So you do a really great job of situating social media as the next disruptive technology in a long line of communication technology that have each kind of had a big impact on the world, I think starting all the way back with Gutenberg in the 15th century in the printing press. I think that would be really helpful for the audience to sort of explain some of the previous ones that have come before and how society has been rent originally and how they've eventually adapted to it.
Sure, yeah, so come with me back in time. So my book is a sleeper history book, actually. You open it up, it's like outrage on the internet, 2012, Donald Trump, and then you get halfway through and it's like, Martin Luther was a fat monk in Germany, and so I really do try to bring us back and steep this strange thing in context, because I just had this feeling as I was working on this book that this is not the first time we have gone through this. We've gone through crazy media disruptions in the past. We've gone through incredible periods of chaos and violence that came as a result of our technology. And so in the book, I went and I read 50 plus history books in the process of writing this book. I think it was like 52 history books. And I was trying to unpack the very specific thing that happens when you expose a whole group of Homo sapiens to a new tool with the recognition that it's not all roses and daisies, right? We have this kind of adage in Silicon Valley where it's like, you are, disruptors. We love disrupting things. It's all good. Everything's raw. The world is better because of technology always. It turns out that a technology as simple as the printing press was the most violent invention to hit Europe until that point in history. All right, it caused roughly 100 years of civil war, and it reorganized society as a whole as a result of it coming into wider use. Right? Martin Luther was this monk who came along and got really angry about some shit the Catholic Church was doing, and he basically wrote a Twitter thread. If you look at his 95 theses, he wrote down these theses, and he pounded them to the wall of the church in Wittenberg, apocryphally. But if you read them today, they're basically an outraged Twitter thread. They read exactly like someone was really pissed off at Barack Obama or Donald Trump, and it's like 95 tweet long Twitter thread of him getting super angry about shit, and it went massively viral. If he had done that 25 years before, he would have been excommunicated and killed, probably in that order, or in the inverse order, killed and then excommunicated, which can happen actually, weirdly. So he happened to intersect with this new technology that Gutenberg had popularized, thrown out there, this new technology called the printing press. And there was printing presses before, but they weren't as fast. The new printing press was about 1,000 times faster. So you could get 1,000 more sheets out per day with a couple of people working on the press. And the result was a net increase in virality that was like 1,000x, right? 1,000x increase in virality. All of a sudden, his ideas went crazy viral. The Catholic Church was trying to quash them, but they couldn't move fast enough. And the result was this explosion of different religions, readings of the Bible. He printed the Bible in the common tongue for the first time. All of a sudden, people had books they could read, but it was super violent. It was super disruptive, and it really did just invert the entirety of the European power structure before that point. So part of this book is piercing the narrative of all technology and all new tools are good for us. There is almost always, particularly with media technology, and I go through each one of these eras in the book, particularly with media technology, there's this period called basically a dark valley where we think it's all great. We're like, oh, this is amazing. We love the printing press or the radio or the television. And then we like drop off a cliff for a period of time, and there's a whole bunch of hidden harms that come from that. And then we figure out through some system and process of moral panic, of good research, of industry change, and of kind of cultural antibodies, we figure out that things are not good here, and we need to work our way out on the other end. And we are in one of those dark valleys right now with social media. And I think we are at the point where we're turning the corner from going down to going up. We're like at the bottom, and we can start to see the light on top. But you can find it with every major technology, particularly media technologies that we've seen in our lives and our ancestors' lives.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think the other one that was really interesting was radio. And I think that has a very direct parallel to where we are today and potentially some government failure we can talk about.
Sure, yeah. Guys, radio, boring, right? Like, cool, radio, whatever. Radio was crazy when we got it for the first time. It was like someone was in your house talking to you from, like, it was like a ghost showed up in your house talking to you about something that's happening in the world. So it was this deeply disruptive technology when it came along, but it had a certain kind of affordances in place that centralized, right? It required a lot of money to start a radio station, to push it out there. Radios were expensive, so people were kind of like huddled around these things, and it came from centralized locations. So if you were to turn on your radio any given evening, any given like Sunday or Monday, in the United States in the late 1930s, you would hear the voice of the lilting voice of a Catholic priest talking about macroeconomic theory and railing against the KKK and telling you the importance of staying out of foreign wars, and then telling you about a secret plot by Jews to take over the country and ruin America. And he was the most popular broadcaster in America. And the issues related to content moderation would be like, no, that's heavy-handed government censorship. Yeah, it was, because we had a fucking Nazi that was owning the airwaves in the minds of millions of Americans, right? So it goes to, and that was the actual inception point of the FCC. That's where it came from. So there's really interesting history here about how we have dealt with these problems of content moderation in the past when things get too far into the chaos, too far into the polemics, into the outrage, into the tribal conflict, that people step in. And this is one of the key takeaways. Like, someone somewhere is always going to determine what you are hearing or not hearing. There is no such thing as universal free speech, right? Like, you have your phone, you might think it's like free speech, but no, there's an algorithm that is determining exactly what you are seeing, what you're not seeing, right? And there's a core kind of piece of the conversation here, is that there is a difference between viral free speech or anyone can say anything anywhere. That is unstable, and it oftentimes results in authoritarian dictatorships, because authoritarians, they're like, this is chaos. I will take this control here, and I will run this country, or I will run this system because you guys can't figure it out. And people default to that when there's too much chaos, when there's too much noise. We oftentimes find ourselves gravitating towards the strong man or the strong voice, the person that speaks to our political persuasion. So you can find these throughout history, and it's a great guide, I think, for this current moment that we're in.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think that was obviously a very difficult time in our history. The government took very decisive action. I think,
and we're glad they did, I think, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Later in the book, you detail, I really enjoyed the part where you were talking about this period in the 50s and 60s and 70s when TV first became a thing. And that was when, there's positive and negatives to this idea that there was truth. And, when an anchor like Walter Cronkite got on the air and said something, it was fact-checked, you believed it, and you thought of it as truth. Now, clearly, a lot of voices were marginalized in that version of the world, but there was kind of a collective story and a collective understanding that we all had. The interesting kind of turning point, and you can draw a line between that and where we are today, is when Reagan came to power and deregulated a lot of the airwaves. And in the process, you gave light to things like Rush Limbaugh to begin with, and from there, Fox News and things on the left as well lead us to a position today where we've kind of been unmoored now, and this idea of truth is not, a lot of people don't believe there is such a thing as truth. There's just slant when it comes to news, and I think that in an echo chamber that's been built has been particularly kind of damaging.
Totally, yeah. So we used to have this thing. So television and radio were so crazy powerful. Government recognized very early on that you can't have 100% of the population listening to this one channel, and then they can just basically pick the president. They can pick members of Congress. It's too powerful. So they implemented this rule called the Fairness Doctrine, which forced these media companies to give balanced views to the perspectives, the political opinions. You had straight news, which is just reporting, not slanted at all. But when there was an opinion, you needed to balance that. You needed to offer alternate perspectives, right? And there's a lot of problems with this. It's actually very complex to find a perfect balance between the universal political opinions of an entire country. And it was very imperfect. I don't want to be super nostalgic about it, because there was problems for sure, right? It was kind of this big hand that was just forced down on all of our brains to some degree, limiting our beliefs and our available information, right? But it did have a couple of good things about it, which there was at least an attempt at separating punditry from straight news, right? That was one of them. And the other one is that the punditry there was at least a public attempt at trying to offer the best version of both sides of a particular argument. Reagan came along. I don't want to just point my fingers at Reagan, because cable was coming along right around that time too, and that was it was confusing. They didn't have a good regulatory framework for fixing this problem. But when they removed the Fairness Doctrine, literally within 1 year, we got this tubby dude the shock jock in Sacramento, who went on the air and started this incredibly successful new form of punditry. His name was Rush Limbaugh. And if you want to draw a line from any particular single individual to the current political craziness that is here today, you can draw a line straight back to him. Trump is he's Trump's biggest teacher, his greatest mentor, and how to speak to an audience, how to focus on their moral dispositions, and how to get them riled up, angry, and entertained at the same time. And it was incredibly successful. Also, one quick anecdote there. In 1975, there was over 2,000 bombings that happened here domestically in the United States. Terrorist bombings that happened here domestically in the United States, right? There was basically terrorism, domestic terrorism happening constantly around the country, and nobody knew about it because they're no, we're not going to talk about that. So there was all these radical groups that were working on Weather Underground and all these crazy radical groups that were happening, but it was again this big hand on top of it, basically saying, nope, we're not going to let you hear about it. So it's weird to think about how this moment feels so much worse than the 1970s. If you talk to your parents about the 1970s, they'll be like, oh yeah, it was okay. It was horrible. It was a horrible time. There was bombings, gas crisis, economic crisis. It was a terrible time. Nixon, impeachment. There was 5 major assassinations: Bobby Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, all within a 7-year period. This was this true chaos. But if you ask your parents about that, they'll be like, yeah, it's okay. It was weird.
Yeah, so the interesting thread between all 3 of the examples that you've given us here is that in each case, when elites lost some of the control they had over media, over communication, society was rent in very meaningful ways. And then in some cases, control was reasserted, in some cases it wasn't. So it is a real challenge here, because this is, again, the power of social media. It gives everyone a voice. This is what technology is supposed to do. The problem is if you give too much of a voice, and especially, that we are particularly susceptible in our society with the First Amendment, it's a very slippery slope to end up in a place where we are today. And I think it's one where, clearly we're hopefully figuring out the other end of it, but it's not clear.
Totally. Yeah. And I want to give some props to the First Amendment. First Amendment is really important. It's great. And the reason we have it, it's because when I have an idea about something, when you look at my idea, can see the problems with my idea better than I can, right? So the whole point of the First Amendment is that good faith refutation of someone else's idea is way better at finding the truth, because the explosion of your claim versus my claim creates more truth in the process, right? And that's what good knowledge networks do. That is actually what academia is supposed to do. That is what journalism is supposed to do. That is why we've built these institutions around this stuff, is to make these ideas clash against each other and produce better truth, right? In the result. The problem is social media is not built for consensus building. It's not built for giving us better access to accurate information. It's built giving us better access to emotional information. And specifically for people that are trying to build an audience, there's no reputational risk for saying the wrong thing, right? There's no reputational risk for me spreading information. I can build bad information. I can build an audience by spreading lies or falsehoods or untruths, by appealing to your biases instead of being responsible for calling out the biases of other people with my reputation on the line.
With that as a nice transition, the presidency of Trump, the candidacy of Trump, in a lot of ways is the culmination of all of the different factors that we're talking about here today. And it's interesting, you mentioned in the book that he planned to run and put up trial balloons several times in the 90s and the aughts and never got the traction that was sufficient to actually go forward. And you argue, and I think I would agree, that it is the current culture and the sort of social media world that we live in that enables someone like him to really get the traction that he did. So I would love to get your analysis on kind of where, how that actually happened. And also, we should chat a little bit about what that means for 2024.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so Trump, guys, 2016 was not the first year that Trump ran for president. He actually tried to do it a couple times before. He put out trial balloons for running for president, but his message didn't land. And we've known Trump for a very long time. He has actually been in the public eye for his whole life, pretty much, right? He's always been this crazy, kind of sycophantic, crazy is the wrong word. He's always really liked the camera. Right, he's always really liked having this engagement, this relationship with the media. So we know who he is. We can look back and we have the receipts. He used to be a Democrat. He used to be pro-choice. He used to be a moderate on some issues, for sure, as well. But something very strange happened. I went back and did this research on a very specific time period in Trump's life, his political, his public persona. If you look at his tweets from 2011, 2012, thing that happened in June 2012, every tweet before this point is your average celebrity tweet. It's like, see me on The View tomorrow, enjoy the show. It's like, try Trump water. It's great. Stupid, silly, average celebrity chaff, right? In June 2012, he was watching Fox News, and he posted, "Barack Obama is a radical." And each tweet before that point would get an average of 40 retweets, all right? When he posted "Barack Obama is a radical," it got 2,000 retweets, okay? And you can look in his timeline, because we have this data, you can see how very soon after that, and he, just like all of us, Trump is a signal processing machine, right? He's looking at the information that's available to him. All of a sudden, he's tweeting, and this one tweet goes boom, and gets this huge quantity of signal from his audience. And all of a sudden, he's like, oh, this is important. This message resonates. I should do more of this. And you can see with consistency, tweet, 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 emotionally outrageous tweet. Obama does this. Obama is terrible. Obama is a terrorist. And you can just see this increasing quantity. He's like A/B testing his own Twitter following to try to figure out what messages resonate best. And that was the start of the current Trump that we know. Right? Before he would say anything to a journalist to get attention, now he will say anything to a Twitter audience on social media to get attention. And that thing that gets attention is the stuff that makes people mad, right? This great viral kind of this explosion of viral signal that caused him to change his behavior, change his mood, change his attitudes, and change his perspectives on what he should say. And that, I think, is the story of why we have the Trump that we have now.
Lucky us. So it's important to acknowledge that there are a lot of positive aspects of social media as well, and there's quite a bit we can do to curtail its kind of negative impact on us individually, as well as if we do them together collectively. And it's also important to acknowledge that there's a lot of founders in the audience that are building technology, and certainly would seek to build things that are more humane and more societally positive. So would love to have you just quickly run through some of your observations and suggestions from the book in terms of what folks can do both individually as well as if they're building products.
Sure. Yeah. Do we have some founders here tonight? Woo. Amazing. Awesome. It's like a strong crew. Yeah, so I think we are past the point of kind of the clear, unbridled euphoria of technology. I think we are at this point now where we recognize that what we build has consequences, right, in general. That's the silver lining of the last 10 years of our crazy lives online. It's recognizing that, you need to take some responsibility for the negative outcomes of the products that you build. The problem is, of course, that you would be stupid as a founder. Stupid is the wrong word. You would be looked at as kind of crazy by your investors if you were focusing on the 1% problems that were happening with your business from the earliest days, right? So, and this, I'm just speaking to the older, early days of social media, euphoria, and early tech, Web 2, even some of Web 3. But it's like, oh no, don't think about the outcomes of the products you build because it'll be worked out at the end. A 1% problem, right? When you have 100 users, that's one person. Doesn't really matter. When you have 10 million users, that is a huge chunk of a population that actually suddenly is doing really bad things with your product, right? They're either having really bad problems or they're actually literally doing bad things. So if 1 in 100 Facebook users was a bad person that was using it to spread outrage, disinformation, rage baits, if Zuck had thought about that early on and thought about some of these edge cases earlier than he did, I think that we'd be in a different position than we are now, right? So I would offer that it's very important to think about some of these very, very specific early stage problems. Don't expend all of your energy on it, but have a plan. Have a plan for maybe how this could go wrong. And there are some great companies these days. I actually just heard earlier tonight about this trust and safety in a box kind of SaaS product that some people are working on. There are a lot of fantastic resources. The Center for Humane Tech has a whole humane tech guide that you can walk through just to help do some early philosophical experiments for how your tech and tools might go wrong in the early days. And so you can start to think about that. And these aren't extremely costly things, right? To ask some of these questions early, it's good, spend a weekend, go through this guide, talk to some people about it, work out where the edge cases are that things might go really wrong. And I think that would solve a lot of problems for us as emerging founders. Because I understand, it's hard. It's hard as an entrepreneur. You got to focus on growth or you die. I 100% get that. But you also need to spend a little more time thinking about these edge cases and how they might affect people.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm maybe a little bit more pessimistic when it comes to larger social networks. the same sources that propelled Zuck and everyone else to focus on engagement first at the cost of everything else are the ones that will essentially, if you're trying to be a scaled social network, will not enable you to compete if you're not making those same choices. And I think it's fascinating to even look at what's happened with TikTok versus Meta in terms of, they built a better algorithm, more singularly focused on engagement and ignored everything else, including who your connections are. And they've now, taken a huge market share bite out of Meta and, essentially left Meta scrambling. The flip side, at least the way I look at it, and the universe of companies that we look at ourselves, is I think it's going to be very difficult to build a scaled Facebook type social network. But the good news is increasingly folks are building smaller social networks, niche businesses, niche for specific communities. And in a lot of ways, if you think about what Facebook itself was, it was a true social network, meaning that your connections and your social graph led to utility for you in the real world, be that not just meeting folks and having connections and chatting, but classifieds, events, lots of other things like that. Now, the ironic part that's happened is because TikTok, did an end around, built this really, really powerful algorithm, it meant that Facebook had to react. And, the way they reacted was with their most powerful and engaged product, which wasn't Facebook, it was Instagram. And Instagram has focused on becoming more like TikTok, where if Facebook is a true social network with social utility, TikTok is a media network. And Instagram is largely a media network and more desires to be a media network. And so what you're left with, specifically with Facebook, is not anyone, your parents are around, right? People really aren't on Facebook anymore, except for maybe like for classifieds or 4 groups. But all of that social utility that existed in Facebook is kind of gone. And so we certainly think there's a huge opportunity to rebuild a lot of that on specific layers, but not with the whole world, but with specific communities and sort of tighter sets of folks. And the beauty of that is if you're able to do it that way, you're also going to have folks that are a lot more value aligned, and some of the really aggressive engagement focused extreme positions will be a lot less tenable. So there's some hope there, I would say.
Yeah, I find there's something interesting there, which is that there is actually something kind of sad that we have lost trust in these giant spaces, right? In these big rooms that we have built, that we've lost trust in Twitter, we've lost trust in Facebook. They've betrayed us, right? And that is actually, there's something kind of tragic about that, right? There's something there in that process of being able to connect to so many people in an authentic way that really is I think that's a tragedy for us in a lot of ways, because maybe they shouldn't have grown that big. Maybe they shouldn't have capitalized on that much of our attention and our market share and our lives. But I still do have some great optimism for what social media can become. I think that there's this tremendous power, just to bring it back to my story meeting this monk in Cambodia years and years ago. If we built a social network that could connect us based on our best qualities and that could give us the tools to really be an empathy connector, right? To really get us beyond this kind of this affective engagement and points of outrage. I think it would be a real service to humanity. And I think that you can kind of squint and see some versions of it right now, and I think there's ways of getting through it. I can give you one small example here. During COVID, my family's house, my parents' house I grew up in, my parents lived there for 38 years, it burned down in California wildfires. It was really gnarly, really sad. And social media at that moment in time for my family was incredible. There's a GoFundMe blossomed spontaneously through friends of friends, and there was it made the transition so much easier for my family to be held in this extended community of people that really cared about them. And I think that there is still this possibility with these tools to do great things for us collectively, and I'm optimistic that we can get there if we prioritize the right things and we work towards it together.
Great. The last question, if you think about what's happened over the last decade with AI, with social media, in a lot of ways, it feels like it's a prelude for what's about to come in the next decade with AI. Clearly, AI from an algorithmic perspective is having a large impact on everything we see in the feed over the last 5 years. But AI writ large in sort of our overall society and economy it's just at the first inning. So curious how you think that's going to interact with everything that you've talked about and social media products specifically.
Yeah, I'd be curious, like, what degree people want to kind of poop their pants, be scared about AI here. Because, like, there's a whole range here of very smart people. Yes, someone wants to poop their pants. Okay, cool. The near future of AI in its current form with social media, I think it has the possibility, the potential. So right now you can search on Twitter, you can search for prompts from ChatGPT, and you can get a whole slew of, everyone here used ChatGPT? Most people? All right, good. You know what it says when it can't do something. It's like, I'm sorry, I'm a large language model, and I have limited access to information. I can't respond to that. You can search for that prompt on Twitter and get hundreds of tweets from large language models that are already on Twitter, that are already engaging as if they are real humans on there, right? And there's a real problem with personhood that we are starting to see already, all right? Which is, if you don't know if someone is real, that is a problem. That is a big issue. That will actually really fuck up things in our society, right? There's so many, what Tristan Harris calls locks on society, right? That are based on humanity, right? So the information about your voice, knowledge about your life, your ability to resolve a CAPTCHA. Does anyone know what GPT-4 did to get around a CAPTCHA when it was being tested? Has anyone heard this? So basically, they ran a whole bunch of tests on GPT-4 to try to figure out if it was safe for us, right? And one of the tests was it gave it a CAPTCHA, and a CAPTCHA is, of course, that weird piece of text you need to type in that computers have a lot of trouble solving. So what it did, it went out, connected to the internet, hired a TaskRabbit human, told the TaskRabbit, I need you to resolve this CAPTCHA for me. All right? The TaskRabbit, this poor, clever TaskRabbit, was like, wait a second, I just have to ask, are you a computer? And you can see in GPT-4's code, you can see what processes it went through to figure out what to say next. And it's like, if I tell the truth to this human, I will not achieve my task. So I need to lie to this human. And what it did was that, no, I am actually a visually impaired person, and I need to get through this CAPTCHA to access my information. That's technology is here now, right? It's already deployed, it's already out in the world. All right, so if you think about how problematic that is for the existing institutions that we already have in place, that are threatened by this personhood, this fake personhood that's out there, that's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. So one of the things I focus on in the book is a very specific set of rules, regulations that are dedicated to determine real personhood online. And I think that is an absolute necessity for the next phase of AI rolling out into our lives. It's going to be a big, big problem.
Yeah, absolutely. It's ironic that Sam Altman's other company is focusing on that, if they ever get any traction.
Right.
It's fascinating to think about all of the scary things that AI is going to be able to do. Especially if you can probably lay a huge portion of the issues related to social media today around the lack of personhood, bots, not knowing kind of where content is coming from, and the ability for swarms of bots to, essentially bring things into being. The flip side is, potentially, the hopeful side is, you can also lay a lot of the problems around social media today in the reality that we've lost this sort of source of truth, and trust has been destroyed in a lot of ways. Now, a lot of that, there isn't always truth, but clearly there's a lot of ways to say this is a likely false statement if you think about Twitter notes and what all the platforms are doing. But the problem is, those are all being given to you from on high by the platform, and you don't have any input, and you are not able to train that model. So the optimistic side of me says AI will get good enough. It probably is good enough today, and I'm sure there are entrepreneurs working on this today, where build me my own sort of engine of truth, where I can go and filter. Me as a human, I'm not going to have time to go and check each and every one of those statements and verify it and understand like how much I should trust this source, how much I should trust this piece of content. Whereas that's what AI is really, really good at, and that's what LLMs are specifically good at. And so, hopeful that you could see some interesting technology and some interesting innovation there.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. I mean, I would not trust ChatGPT right now to source anything. Including like if you've asked it about yourself. I don't know if anyone's asked it about yourself. It knows a bunch of things about me that I didn't know about myself, that are patently false, and it will give me really strange hallucinations about my life. I'm like, that's cool.
That's before the book came out.
Right, exactly. Even before the book came out, so I'm sure it's going to get way more weird today. But I am. So you're talking about something. I am actually optimistic that these tools can get better at being like epistemic engines, helping to filter better information for us. There's a version of ChatGPT that I have been training to go out. It connects to the internet. I ask it to go out and source all of the headlines of like 3 major news sites, and then rank order them and contextualize them based on statistical prevalence in my life. So I get this news feed that's basically like, cool, like this thing is probably going to relate to your life because of X, Y, and Z. It's unlikely to happen though. So here's the next thing. This is something that is actually maybe more likely to happen in your neighborhood. You should read this news. And that kind of thing is amazing, right? I think there's some potential there for creating some incredible new tools for contextualizing the information we already have. I think in terms of sourcing information, we're not there yet, and I'm hopeful that we can get there.
Cheers. Great conversation. Everyone go out and buy the book.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
And I think we've got some
educational levels and susceptibility to outrage, or do those, and with that in mind, like if there is a deficit as it relates to education levels.
What is it? Yeah. Yeah.
Is that not the right metric to associate with outrage?
Yeah, totally. So the question is there any association with outrage levels and education? So do smarter people get more outraged or less outraged than not smart people? Sadly, the answer is no. From all the study and research I've seen, you're just as likely as a very smart person to get extremely pissed off about something you see online as someone else. You're going to be pissed off at something else than the person that maybe has less educational experience than you. But no, absolutely, you can be incredibly intelligent and also very angry about something you see online. And like these tools are very good at figuring that out, right? Like they're going to find out what specific thing that's happening. There's this problem with anecdotes in our life, right? We're exposed to so many anecdotes, and it's hard to know if the anecdote is part of a trend or if it's just a single thing, right? And if there's a universal body of available, terrifying, or outrageous